We don't need to be there. We're just trying to provoke a problem. And this guy's nuts over there, so why provoke him? We are acting from a sense of insecurity that we have to say, you know, we're tough, don't mess with us or we'll bomb you. But that to me is just sort of childish. So the sooner we get out of there, the better. We've been there way too long. And, you know, this whole idea, the stage is set now that, you know, the Koreans are threatening, well, we might shoot down an airplane. Well, what if there's, now that stage is set, it's progressing because of our involvement, somebody's going to use a false flag and somebody's going to shoot down the airplane just so that this war gets started.
Well, on Friday, the North Korean communist dictatorship's diplomat canceled his speech at the UN, which was unheard of, and then came back Saturday. And, well, why not just hear it directly from him, what he said?
He tried to insult the supreme dignity of my country by referring it to a rocket. By doing so, however, he committed an irreversible mistake of making our rocket's visit to the entire U.S. mainland inevitable all the more. In case innocent lives of the U.S. are harmed because of this suicide attack, Trump will be held totally responsible. What else could be a bigger threat than the violent remarks such as pouring fire and fury, total destruction coming from the top authority of the world's biggest nuclear power?
Okay. Congressman, former congressman, medical doctor, Air Force veteran, Ron Paul was against the Iraq wars. He was against the Afghanistan operations. He's been against all of it. He's been proven right. His son, and of course himself still in Congress, spearheaded exposing the fact that the West had backed Al-Qaeda and then ISIS later. And then Trump rightfully picked up that gauntlet and took the baton forward and has helped clean up a lot of ISIS and kicked him out of Syria to a great extent. Now would be the time to come home. Instead, the neocons and others want to go into Syria and kick out Assad himself. Ron Paul has written extensively on that. So has the Von Mies Institute and the Ron Paul Institute. The story's posted on newswars.com and infowars.com. Ron Paul, How to End the Korea Crisis. Kim joins Saddam, Gaddafi, Assad on a list of madmen, says Paul. This is a complex issue, but he's got a very well-researched angle on it, so I want to get his take. Thank you for joining us during this critical time.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Now, there's a delay today with our connection to you in Houston, but that's okay. Again, just so folks know. Dr. Paul, let's get into your plan to avert, which could happen any time, causing a huge nuclear war.
Well, the sooner we get out of there, the better. You know, we went into Korea when I was in high school, and it was totally illegal, unconstitutional. It was done without the permission of the people. It was done within a week after the Civil War broke out in Korea. And some of my teachers never came home. And ever since that time, I've been saying, why are we there? What should we be there? During all my campaigning, especially the presidential campaigns, I said, just come home. We've spent $1 trillion over there, you know, keeping them together. And look at what's happened in Vietnam. We finally lost in Vietnam after 60,000 Americans get killed, and now we get along with them. We don't need to be there. We're just trying to provoke a problem. And this guy's nuts over there, so why provoke him? We are acting from a sense of insecurity that we have to say, you know, we're tough, don't mess with us or we'll bomb you. But that to me is just sort of childish. So the sooner we get out of there, the better. We've been there way too long. And, you know, this whole idea, the stage is set now that, you know, the Koreans are threatening, well, we might shoot down an airplane. Well, what if there's, now that stage is set, it's progressing because of our involvement, somebody's going to use a false flag and somebody's going to shoot down the airplane just so that this war gets started. So that's why I believe in non-intervention. We ought to defend this country, but it's time to come home from Korea. We've lost too many lives. We killed, even when we got involved in that civil war, you know, with the North and the South, we bombed the North to smithereens. We killed 30% of their population, and they had never attacked us. We never declared war. We went there under UN banner. We have an insane foreign policy, and unfortunately, it really hasn't changed that much with our new president.
Dr. Ron Paul is our guest. We're talking about the North Korea situation, and obviously they're now sending bombers over the DMZ, big provocations. We know a lot of Ukrainian missiles that give them ICBM capability have been shipped in, smuggled into the North. And when you talk about a false flag, how do we know some major arms manufacturer or some other country doesn't smuggle a missile in, like we saw in Ukraine, shoot down one of our bombers or try to shoot it down, and then suddenly we're into a kinetic action, a war starts. The North then attacks the South, Seoul, with 100,000 pieces of artillery. They've been threatening to detonate a hydrogen bomb above ground to attack Tokyo. We could very quickly get into a large nuclear war. And a lot of people say, well, we can easily defeat North Korea. Well, of course we can. But what happens if China or Russia gets involved, Dr. Paul?
Well, they will get involved. And, you know, when it started way back in the 50s, we thought, well, we'll take care of this. And a month after the war broke out, you know, we essentially won the war. And then we moved up and decided, well, we'll occupy North Korea, went up to the border, and then the Chinese came in. Sure, they're going to be involved. But I think you just made the case for why we need to be out of there because, you know, the North Korea, the guy is goofy. But I tell you what, he does know what he's doing because he has to threaten because he believes that if he gives up and capitulates and does exactly what we tell him to do, that what will happen, like what happened to Saddam Hussein, what happened to Gaddafi, and then how do we treat you know, Assad in Syria? We have an empire to defend. We run the world, and it's wrong. It doesn't work. Millions of people have died over this, and it's time we as a people woke up and say, we ought to mind our own business. We ought to come home and defend this country. We don't need to be worrying about, you know, battleships and bombers and flying back and showing that we have strength. They're weapons that were used in World War II. And this guy who runs North Korea, he's not going to invade the United States. He's not going to launch a missile. Just remember, the whole thing dealing with Iraq, about all the danger, great danger, and the propagandists, the deep state, the media, convinced the American people that Saddam Hussein was a danger. They're doing the same thing now with North Korea. And that's why we ought to wise up and just not buy into this and look at this as a constitutional issue and not to say, well, we need to go to war with this guy. And unfortunately, we're marching that way. But we better look at ourselves, too, and why are we involved in 120 different countries with our military personnel, and why are we always looking for trouble? And I would say that it's very, very dangerous, but just to say, well, it was always Saddam Hussein's fault, it was always Gaddafi's fault, it's always Assad's fault, and then turn around and say, oh, yeah, but look at Russia, look at what they're going to do. I mean, it is the neocon foreign policy that we have been following. We still follow the neocon foreign policy. I think that's tragic.
That said, I agree with you in practice and function. But even people like Joel Skousen that agreed with you about not having a war, you know, in the last 5 or 6, saying they were frauds. He says when you get down to North Korea now, they do have nuclear weapons. They are being backed by China. They are a real threat. They are firing missiles right over Japan. They can test weapons, but doing it in this way, threatening preemptively to blow up the U.S., to say it's inevitable, that's pointing a gun at us and really next-level bravado. It's incredible chicken. And then you have the Clintons, as you know, transferring the reactors, transferring the missiles in the mid-'90s that you and others criticized when you first got back into Congress. And so there's a lot of blame going around here. And then you just have the horrible little communist third-generation dictator fat off the blood of his little skinny citizens. I agree with you, the poor, you know, North Korean slaves and their children. I feel sorry for them. I don't want to have to, you know, nuke the DMZ. But if they do strike us first, I think they may be crazy enough to do it, then it's going to take a major commitment to make sure they can't counter-respond.
You're buying into all the garbage that's passed out there by the deep state and neoconservatives and the media. My suggestion very clearly on what we should do is we should allow the South Koreans to talk to the North Koreans. What's wrong with that? They're the ones that have everything at stake. and we don't even allow them to do that. And yet they're willing to. Just last week, the South Koreans, in an effort to break this conflict, they sent a couple $1 million to North Korea to take care of some of the people, the kids that are suffering from our sanctions. The people suffer. We kill people. We killed almost 1 million Iraqis with our sanctions before we went to war. And all these sanctions do is just provoke the bitterness. We need to why do we prohibit the South Koreans from talking to the North Koreans?
By the way, Madeleine Albright.
We did that in Vietnam. And the French and Americans did that, and millions of it.
Sure. I mean, it's like Madeleine Albright said, 500,000 Iraqi children is a good price to pay with the sanctions. It's probably way over 1 million. Lancet, British Medical Journal, said it was like 1.3 back in like 2007, going back to 1990. And understand, Dr. Paul, I'm just wargaming both sides of the debate. I've not bought in to the garbage that we need to have a war or that sanctions are always the best thing. As you said, Vietnam now loves us, hates communist China, is becoming a free market powerhouse, and we should have made a deal with Ho Chi Minh to go in there and be free market to begin with, but we double-crossed him, tried to overthrow him, as you know, back in 1960. So I understand the history of it as you do as a former Air Force officer. The only thing I'm getting at here is that we can certainly recognize communist regimes are also horrible evils. Just because we have neocon problems here, I mean, certainly this is a great example of how communism is a horrible nightmare like Venezuela.
Well, I still think that you're seeing them as a much greater threat. And when I was drafted in 1962 over the Cuban crisis, you know, there was a real hot Cold War going on at the time. But we had danger then. The Soviets had 30,000 nuclear missiles and weapons. But we didn't provoke or thought we had to get rid of them. We actually dealt with them. Kennedy talked to them and, you know, got rid of that crisis we had in Cuba. North Korea, they don't have this capability. It's not. China is not. It is not interested, not in their interest to allow this guy to provoke and get into a war with us. So that isn't quite accurate to say that they're in cahoots with China and they have nuclear bombs and all this sort of thing. And I think that we should allow South Korea to start having negotiations. Let China and Russia, they're involved more. They should be more involved than us. Let them monitor the
Sure,
talk.
Dr. Paul.
But why are we 6,000 to 7,000 miles away? Once again, we've been involved in a civil war that's been going on endlessly. It's time we stopped it.
Let's be clear. I agree with you. I have 4 children. You've got a bunch of children. You've got a bunch of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, I'm told now. And I absolutely do not want us to have a nuclear war. I do not want this to happen. I understand that what you're saying is historically true. I'm simply pointing out that President Trump has been right on so many other issues. And I understand that it looks like there's been an escalation. He believes that the strategic appeasement, the strategic patience has run out, and that he's looking for some other way to get North Korea to come to the bargaining table. Hell, months ago, Rex Tillerson was saying, let's have talks, stop this rhetoric, and it only seemed to encourage Kim Jong-un. So I understand you can say we're ganging up on North Korea, and the people hurt are the poor folks in it. That's true. I'm not saying you're wrong. But what about the dictators? What about the horrible, evil leaders of the nation? What are we supposed to do about them?
Alex, you're speaking for the neoconservatives. That's their line of talk of why we have to do this. And I'm just arguing it's totally unnecessary. It didn't work. You admit it didn't work in Vietnam, and we should have done that differently, and we're friends with them. We win more in peace than we do in war, but we've been in Korea. This whole thing is just based on a lot of misconceptions. I think our administration has accepted neocon lies, and they're going with it. But
and I agree with you.
Get into trouble because of the diplomacy and the tone and all this.
And I agree with you. So in just a minute or two, because I have a few other questions dealing with the economy and what's happening with all this NFL race baiting and the rest of the culture wars, what is your advice to President Trump?
Bring the troops home. I would advise him just what my position has been for years. Get out of interventionism. Bring the troops home. Get out of all this meat. Get out of Syria, out of Iraq, the whole works. You know, start dismantling our empire. Get all our troops out of Korea and allow people to settle their own dispute, but not to join this neocon effort to continue to run the world and distort the truth, because they love the wars in the Middle East, and now the neocons are behind all this activity, why we have this great enemy, the North Koreans. I think when we get so upset about that we're insecure, we act like a bunch of bullies, we're insecure, we don't know how to react and say, oh, they're coming, they're going to come us, and they're going to bomb us. Alex, that is not true, and the Chinese aren't on that side of that issue at all. They are holding him back, if nothing else, because they have too much to lose. They don't want any more war in North Korea than we do. So I don't think it's right to say this guy in North Korea is going to, because he's aligned with the Chinese, that they're going to help him, you know, provoke a war with the United States.
Just to be clear, their main trading partner is the Chinese. I'd love to see the two countries unified and this nightmare end. I'm not going with that line. I'm looking at both the lines of reasoning here just to play devil's advocate. I overall agree with you and hope that's the way this goes. But they do say they have hydrogen bombs. It is believed they have them. They're saying they'll preemptively use them. So they're putting out horrible rhetoric as well. I get your point that they need to look strong. They saw what happened to Iraq and other countries that didn't have nuclear weapons. They look at, Iran looks at that. So moving away from that, because I think we actually agree on that subject, and I pray everything turns out all right. We've got your article posted on Infowars.com promoting that. Getting into the NFL thing, we have the WikiLeaks. It's George Soros saying, let's go to culture war, even during the campaign, promote racial division. You had a black president. You've got all these millionaire football players. People are tuning out of the NFL in droves, and they're only accelerating it as we see more and more wound up attacks on white churches. Whites are being killed in hate crimes. And it's so fashionable to be anti-white. And if you point that out, all this anti-white racism, they call us racist when everybody knows you and I and others have been calling for unity and, really bringing the country together. What is all this about? Where do you see this going? What's going to end up happening?
Well, I think it is part of this cultural Marxism, and, attacking tradition and culture is part of their tool. But when you narrow it down to the demonstrations on the football field, actually the answers are coming back pretty fast. The people are disgusted with it, and they're disgusted with the football players. They're disgusted with the owners. They're starting to boycott, and I think that is very good. I just think the president ought to just, be a lot less noisy about it, threatening people, that they're committing some crime. No, this can all be solved with a libertarian understanding of property. What those ball players do is determined by the owners, just as it would be in your studio or in your house or in my house. It's the ownership. So it has nothing to do with government and freedom of speech. It has nothing to do with the First Amendment. But it has a lot to do with what the cultural Marxists is trying to do. But the people who condone this and encourage it and expand this with the kneeling business, I think that's dangerous. But it's a reflection of the ownership that can be stopped immediately by just the owner saying, no more. That is it. But if they condone it, you can't write a law and you can't intimidate. You can't say that they're right under the First Amendment. No, it has nothing to do with the First Amendment.
I totally agree with you.
It has to do with what the owners are going to do with their property, and the market will answer.
No, I agree. Trump's gone too far when he talks about having a rule. It's his right to come out and say he thinks they're, idiots or whatever. But when he goes further, he then starts encroaching on free speech. I mean, I think a lot of it's figurative, but then how do the owners not let them do celebrations in the end zone, even though they're hiking their leg, peeing on the president symbolically? How can they fine them for that, but not fine them if they don't stand for the Star-Spangled Banner? And I get it's free speech. You shouldn't have to stand. My point is there's this open globalist attack on America now, and that's why I'm simply saying I have my free speech to say I am going to boycott the NFL forever.
That's the answer. That's the answer. Boycott them. And if the owners want to act like jerks and prohibit one sort of expression of a political opinion and not the other one, then they just dig a bigger hole for themselves. And you know, the other thing about this, I need to get this in if possible. You know, a lot of this got worse once the football team started taking money from the government to promote this super nationalism and militarism, because all of that military stuff, they get a lot of money, but that's to support the interventionist foreign policy in the military, and the military can do no wrong. It's support for the empire. That is where the problem is. And the American people should absolutely not allow our government to give 1 cent to the football and advertise there to promote the militarism of our government.
We only have 45 seconds real quick on the economy. If we don't get the tax cuts, Paul Ryan wants taxes to be raised now. If we keep Obamacare, most analysts say that will cause a new recession or depression and cause that big implosion you've been warning of. 30 seconds on that, Dr. Paul.
It looks bad. I sure hope they can get the tax cut through. If they blow that, then we're really in trouble. But it's not unusual to develop, you know, some of these welfare programs. It's almost impossible to stop them. And hopefully, though, we can compensate. Trump, if I had to look for one thing, he has set an atmosphere where there'll be less regulation. If he can get a tax cut through, that will be helpful. But
yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Paul. Thank you for all your time.
In ancient times, man roamed the earth in a constant state of hunting or being hunted. Introducing Caveman, where cutting-edge science meets ancient super nutrients. Secure your bottle right now at InfoWarsStore.com.